Good evening, and thank you for attending. My name is Natalie Sayre, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's debate. Before we begin, please silence all phones and electronic devices. Additionally, please refrain from any interruptions to the debate, as it is being recorded for on-demand viewing and post-captioning services. The Citizens Clean Election is the sponsor for this evening's event. The Clean Elections Act is a campaign finance reform and public education measure initiated by Arizona citizens and passed by voters in 1998. The system provides clean funding for qualified candidates who participate and agree to abide by the Clean Elections Act and rules. These include contribution and spending limits, foregoing special interest money, and participating in commission debates. We encourage audience questions, so please utilize the note card given to you when you enter the room and hold it up. Our volunteers will pick up the cards and deliver them to me. If you need additional cards, just raise your hand. If you have questions for a specific candidate, please include the candidate's name on the card, and it will be considered in the second half of the debate. We screen questions for clarity, to eliminate duplications, speeches, or personal attacks on candidates. The debate is scheduled for up to 75 minutes, so we may not get to all of the questions, but we will do our best. Tonight's debate includes 1-minute opening statements. The first half of the debate begins with 2 minutes for each candidate to answer the same question. After all the candidates have responded, the first responding candidate will be given an additional 30 seconds. We will rotate which candidate responds first. The second half will allow for a different question for each candidate with 1 minute to respond, and some questions will have an optional 30 seconds for the other candidates to comment. And finally, we'll close with 1-minute closing statements. We ask that you remain polite to all of the candidates, no matter how much you agree or disagree with what's being said. Give them a fair and uninterrupted hearing. Tonight's participants are Mr. Paul Boyer, a Republican candidate for state senator in District 20. Mr. Doug Irvin, a Democratic candidate, state senator, District 20, and a clean elections participant. Ms. Hazel Chandler, a Democratic candidate for state representative in District 20 and a clean elections participant. And finally, Mr. Christopher Gilfillan, Chris, a Democratic candidate, state representative for District 20 and also a clean elections participating candidate. The order in which the candidates will speak has been determined by alphabetical orders, starting with the last name and starting with the Senate for opening comments, and we'll progress from that starting point. The order for the second half will be determined by reverse alphabetical order by last name, starting with the House. So Paul, will you start your opening comments, please?
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Paul Boyer, and I'm running for state Senate. And I want to say thank you to Clean Elections for having this debate, and also for you for being here, without which our representative government couldn't occur. So thank you for being here. I'm a husband. My beautiful wife, Beth, is in the back. I'm also a teacher. I've been in the classroom for going on 5 years. I teach high school literature. So I'm in the classroom every single morning, and I realized the impact that we have at the state legislature on education policy, on education funding, everything education related. Education and public safety are two very important issues to me. These last 2 sessions, we've passed real balanced budgets. We've increased funding for schools, new funding, by $700 million, which will end up being over $2 billion by 2020. That's significant. That's new funding. My overriding question always remains, is it good for Arizona? That's what I think about anytime I think about public policy. If you'd like to learn more, obviously we'll talk more, but my website is boyeraz.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug, your opening comments.
Well, thank you all for being here, for the candidates, and to the Clean Elections Commission. Hopefully tonight we're going to have a robust discussion about the issues facing our community, and we'll touch on the pillars of my campaign, which are education, equality, and the environment, and how my experience as an accountant, environmentalist, and tutor for second graders will be beneficial. My family moved to Arizona when I was 3 years old. My dad was a captain in the Air Force. My mother was a teacher of nursing. And they instilled in me the importance of treating people with respect and personal integrity. And that's the kind of values I've tried to pass along to my stepchildren. Unfortunately, a lot of our current lawmakers don't set very good examples in these areas, especially when they put party before people and they choose personal political gain instead of helping out our young children. So clearly, we need to bring back sensible government to Arizona, which is why I'm running for state senator, and thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you. Hazel.
Hi, it's great to be here, and I thank you for being here. I'm not a politician, I'm a grandmother, a mother, and I'm your candidate for Arizona House. I've been a long-time Arizona resident and a resident of this area, and I've worked in many different areas: healthcare, education, early childhood, behavioral health, and environmental issues. And in each of these roles, I have been part of collaborative leadership to find real solutions to the challenges that face our country, our state. My big issues are education, making sure we have fully funded public education, an environment that will be supportive of our children and our grandchildren, and health care for all. We live in chaotic times. It's never been more important, I think, to have a strong woman's voice at the legislature to represent you. The greatest challenge are human issues, not partisan issues, and we must find common ground and work together to find real solutions. I want to thank you very much. I'd love to serve you in the legislature.
Thank you. And Chris.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Natalie, for moderating this, and Clean Elections for hosting this debate. Again, my name is Chris Gilfillan. I'm a candidate for the House of Representatives in LD 20. I got into this because I have a family full of teachers, and I've been an education advocate who's been at this and considers students the very top priority. Education is a personal issue to me. My mom's a special education teacher's assistant in a middle school, and she's been a zealous advocate for her students for many, many years. But the Arizona legislature needs to step up and find dedicated funding sources for our education system, not just promises. But I'm no one-trick pony. I worked in business development for years and want to make sure our entrepreneurs can survive and thrive past their ribbon cutting. I also want to make sure they can get the workforce they deserve and the ones that they need to grow. And finally, we need a transparent government. Before I was a lawyer, I was a newspaper editor, so I care deeply about transparency, accountability inside of our government institutions. I want to bring more sunshine to our conflicts of interest at the state legislature, in dark money spending on elections, and want to make sure that politicians report any financial interests that they have when advancing legislation.
Thank you. At this point in time, we will begin the portion of the debate where each candidate gets 2 minutes to answer each question, and then the first respondent, again, will get the additional 30 seconds to respond. And Doug, we're going to start with you. So the question for all of you will be, what are your top 3 items on your agenda for an upcoming legislative session, and why?
So thank you for the question. My top 3 items relate a lot to what my pillars were, which are education, equality, and the environment. So starting with education, obviously there is a funding issue with our schools, and then there's a transparency issue with charter schools, which hopefully we're going to touch on quite a bit here. But as far as the funding education for our schools, as an accountant, I actually have a plan so that we can generate the necessary revenue without putting the burden on working families. And it's a broad-based plan that we can talk about that gets into closing the sales tax exemptions that are out there right now that got excessive, repealing back the STOs, which are draining about $150 million out of our general fund and sending it off to private schools right now, and also resetting our corporate tax rates so that they're equitable and actually encourage companies to invest in Arizona, not just give it away to out-of-state companies. The second relates to equality. And in there's many pieces to the puzzle, including voter rights and things, but the biggest piece in there for me is health care. We need to make sure that everybody has access to quality and affordable health care. We need to make sure that we're no longer playing games with things like kids' care. We're not delaying funding for it. We're not repealing it or putting in these artificial freezes strictly for political reasons on that. And then the environment. We've heard a lot about water. Even as a little kid growing up in Arizona, I was taught that water is critical to this state. And they said, luckily, we have people who are looking at it and making plans. And they would set 100-year goals. And I'd go, wow, 100-year goals, that's great. Not realizing 50 years later, 100 years doesn't seem like that long ago. But now we need to do that again, because our city has grown much more than anyone could have ever imagined. Our state is growing, and it's getting more complex. So we must be getting back and doing some water issues from there. We started to do it a little bit, but unfortunately it became a political football down at the legislature, and so nothing was done. I want to use my training as an environmentalist and my skills bringing a coalition together to make sure we really address this water issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hazel.
Well, thank you. What I would have said a couple days ago as my #1 priority probably has changed to the last couple days. I think it's time that women have equal rights, and I think the Equal Rights Amendment needs to pass out of Arizona ASAP. We just can't go on as a state and as a nation with what's going on with that. That being said, my highest priorities are education, healthcare, and environment. I think they're all interrelated, and none of them are easy issues. They're very complex issues. They're very interrelated, and the only way we're going to solve them is when we bring all the parties together and work together and put everything on the table. And instead of taking a lot of little tiny bills, which has been what our legislature has done for eons, we need some comprehensive legislation that will really fully start to address that. And we may not be able to implement everything at once, but we start with the first steps and the second steps, but we need the plan before we start those steps instead of piecemealing and having things that don't work. I've worked on some big projects with our legislature in the past, and that's the way it was done. We had to bring people across the aisle together, and at times were some pretty heated discussions, but when you have everyone in the room and you have a goal that you have to reach, we've been able to do that. We have to have permanent funding for education. We have to protect kids' care and the Access program. And I shudder to think what Arizona is going to be like 15, 20 years ago if we do not address the issues around climate change and water and our air quality.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Chris.
Well, I just want to second what Hazel said about the Equal Rights Act. I think that's something we should definitely pass in Arizona's future. But I have 3 main issues, just like I discussed earlier: education, small business, and government accountability. I think we're still very short of where Arizona public schools need to be, especially in funding prior to the recession. And we're nearly alone in that respect. And that's why we're losing teachers like my sister-in-law, who moved from Lake Havasu City back to Texas, got 3 years of training here, and got a $20,000 raise and more management responsibilities just by moving. That cannot be happening, and it affects not just our teachers and our education students and our students, but it also affects businesses, those blue chip businesses who want to move here. We need those businesses to come here, and they bring jobs with them, and that's not happening. I've been an advocate for change at the school system for many years, and my plans include implementing a full-day kindergarten, expanding pre-K programming, especially for schools in low-income areas, providing competitive teacher pay coupled with more rather than less rigorous requirements for teacher certification, seeing a full and transparent audit and review of corporate tax credits for the school tuition organizations in the voucher system. I want to improve our charter school oversight board so it has the power to hold charter schools to financial and academic standards through serious enforcement mechanisms. And then I want to expand and fund the use of Arizona's teaching academies, which marries 2 really strong things that we have, which is one strength and one weakness: strong public universities and a weakness in teacher shortage. But the other things that I wanted to support are I want to promote a vibrant economy with good, high-paying jobs and have a vibrant tech economy with research and development tax credits so these big blue-chip companies can base here, get the research done at ASU West or Glendale Community College, and build into the next Honeywell. And lastly, I just want to make sure that we have more sunshine on conflicts of interest inside of the legislature. We can't have politicians making money off of being a politician. We need disclosure at the state level, and I want to call for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Paul, your opening statement, or your answer.
Yeah. Thank you. Actually, I have 5 things that I'd like to do next year, and this is in no order of importance. They're just as they come to mind. I had a bill last year that would have provided an anonymous hotline for any student in the state of Arizona to call anytime they see dangerous or violent activity on their on their K-12 campus. Unfortunately, that died in the Senate. That's one of the reasons that I'm running for Senate. It seems that we'll get good policy out of the House, and it'll pass 59-0 or something close to that, and we can't get it across the finish line. So that's one issue that I'd like to work on. Teacher evaluations. I think this should happen at the local level, not at the state level. I also think that our English language learner program, again, it died in the Senate. Right now, Arizona is the only state in the nation that mandates a top-down state-mandated approach of a 4-hour block. What we've seen in the field, it doesn't work. Every person I've talked to who implements the English language learner program has told me that the current system doesn't work. Sadly, our English language learner population, which is 83,000 students, they actually perform worse on state standardized testing than our special education population. And that, to me, is just egregious. We have to fix that. Statute of limitations for sexual assault victims. In the state of Arizona, if you are a sexual assault victim, you only have 2 years from the date of your 18th birthday to file a civil claim, which in many cases is the only place where a victim can actually get justice for what was done to them. Now, there are numerous reasons why a victim doesn't come forward. They don't have the money. They're in a position where the perpetrator is in a position of authority over them. I mean, it may be shame, guilt. There's many reasons. And so we just need to give victims more time. The current law in Arizona only protects the victimizer and not the victim. That's one thing I want to change. And we agree on STOs, Douglas. I really think that needs to be reformed. The 20% every year needs to be much lower, and I think it also needs to be means tested. So those 5 things.
Thank you. And Doug, your additional 30 seconds.
Yeah, so Paul and I agree on some things. I actually compliment him on one bill that he mentioned, especially there's also the anonymous tip line. The problem is that was a great idea in 2016 when Dr. Eric Myers introduced that bill. Unfortunately, the chairman of the Education Committee refused to hear it. That would happen to be Paul. And it got so bad that there were 2 teenagers who called him repeatedly and tried to come to his office to get that bill heard, to the point that Dennis Welch wrote an article saying, "Why won't you hear this bill?" So luckily, 2 years later, Paul introduced it, brought those teenagers forward, got the bill through, but unfortunately it stalled in the Senate because he tried to do a striker on it.
Thank you. And you can use your time the next time to comment to that. So how will you work across the aisle with the opposite party for the betterment of the state? That's the next question. And Hazel, we will start with you.
Well, what I've been about all my life is working across the aisle. I've worked with people from all walks of life, and I've worked with the legislature. I've worked with Republicans as much as Democrats. And what I find is when you have a goal in mind and when you're willing to listen to each other, you can get things done. I've had times when I've had people say, well, I'm not going to work with you. I absolutely am not going to work with you. But when you take time to listen to their side of the story and not spend a lot of time telling them that they're wrong, but really listen and then ask them to listen to you, we get a lot done. And I think that that's very much what I would do if I was in the legislature.
Thank you. Chris.
Well, I grew up in the rural South, where we didn't really care much what your political persuasion was. We just cared whether you got things done. I went to law school in Mississippi. I grew up in Western North Carolina. And I want to work across the aisle. I grew up in a bipartisan household. My father is a Catholic deacon. Life is his issue. I learned from that. I probably was the spear in his side a lot of the time to talk about the issues and being the liberal in the household. But I want to make sure that we do get the job done. And I think, unfortunately, we've lost that practicality on the national level, and I want to bring it back down to the local level, because that's how we get things done down at the state legislature, and I have no problem reaching across the aisle to find practical solutions. Really, on that note, I receive constant bipartisan support from organizations. One of those is the Arizona Technology Council. This is a business-friendly group of technology companies that just really wants to make sure that we grow the infrastructure for business business and tech companies inside of Arizona. So I was endorsed by them, and I think I want to be a good advocate for them as well down at the state legislature. And then secondarily, I was also endorsed by bipartisan education advocacy group Stand for Children. I was a member of Stand for Children in 2012 because I was passionate about education initiatives and passing bonds and overrides and making sure our teachers were supported. I think they do great work inside of school systems, and they endorse both Republicans and Democrats, and they work with struggling school systems and districts. But for more than that, they do a lot of work with parents. They make sure they learn and make sure they empower them to go to school boards and advocate for their children. That is just very inspiring for me, and that's what makes me want to go to the legislature and support bipartisan, reach across the aisle, practical solutions for LD 20.
Thank you. Paul, your 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to refer to, or speak to Douglas's comments about the two girls that he mentioned. Douglas is living in a few years in the past because I've been working with those two little girls. In fact, they testified before my committee in the bill that I sponsored to make sure that hotline goes into effect. The reason why that bill died, the governor liked the idea so much, he included it in his school safety package. And as you all know, unfortunately, because of other issues, not that, because of the stop protection order, that bill ultimately failed at the legislature. So that's one bill. In fact, that'll probably be Senate Bill 1001. When I come back, and I'll be introducing that, working with those same two girls, making sure that we do have an anonymous hotline moving forward. As far as working but in a bipartisan manner, I mean, just look at my record. If you look at my PTSD bill, the Officer Craig Tiger Act, that bill passed, I want to say, 57-2 in the House. My cancer presumption bill, that passed in the Senate 27-3. If you look at my ELL bill, that passed 59-1. I mean, I work with Republicans, Democrats, I'll even work with independents. I'll work with anybody because good policy doesn't have an R or a D next to good policy. It's just it's either it is or it isn't good policy. So I would just say, look at my record. I too have been endorsed by Stand for Children because they've recognized the good work that I've done on education. Okay.
Okay. Then, Doug, your 2 minutes,
2 minutes.
if you want to go back to the original question or respond to Mr. Boyer.
I'll do both. He said, look at his record, which we've done. And so there is a lot of things, whereas the chairman of the Education Committee, if you have a D on your name, that bill's not getting heard. There was situations like kids care, where it came up and it voted heavily in the House. Again, it was one of those ones that got stalled in the Senate. So we get to budget reconciliation. Kelly Butler puts an amendment. It's exactly like the kids care. Don't freeze that health insurance. Unfortunately, Kelly Butler's a Democrat, so all the Republicans voted against it. This is not people who are looking across the aisle for the best policy. These are people who are playing political games. And that's not what I want to do. I want to make sure we get things done. I'm not going to look at the letter next to the bill's name and see whether or not we're going to hear it. I want to see if it's a good idea, let's move it forward. If it's not, we won't. And even I have things called Candidates in the Park, where we'll actually go to a local park, put up some signs, put out some flyers, and say, hey, come talk to me. I don't just put flyers on the Democrat houses. We put up flyers on a lot of the houses that are out there. And I don't ask people when they come up, hey, what party are you with? I just want to hear what your ideas are. What's concerning to you? What's most important to you and your family? We find out later after we've chatted with these people, often they're like, I support you a lot. I want to take your sign and move them home. So we'll go to record that so we remember where the signs are and find out, wow, they voted Republican their whole life. This is very good because I want to listen to people. And that's what I've done my whole life. I used to design software for financial systems for some of the top biggest companies in the world that you can think of. Often these were very direct competitors. We would get them in a room or I'd talk to them individually and say, what do you need? We could work it out. I'd listen to the best idea here, best idea there. I'd say, here's my proposed solution. Does that work for you? And in most cases, they'd say, yeah, I like this, we'll tweak that. They weren't worried about their direct competitor might have the same thing. They knew that they were gaining efficiencies and that it was better overall for their industry, their consumers, and them individually. So that's what I want to bring to the legislature, that we're moving things forward long-term for Arizona, not for one party or the other.
Thank you. And Hazel, your 30 seconds.
I really don't have a whole lot to add to that, except we just have to get away from this politics of fear and the politics of separate and political alignments. And we have to get to a place where we can come together, work together, and solve the problems. We need to be able to look at the issues that are facing us with courage. And we need to work together to find real solutions.
Thank you. Chris, we'll start with you on this one. According to the Arizona Food Banks, nearly 1 in 6 adults and almost 1 in 4 children in Arizona struggle with food insecurity. How would you use your influence in the legislature to address this issue?
Well, certainly poverty is an issue in Arizona. We're 46th in the nation for poverty, especially child poverty issues. We've seen direct cuts to poverty issues, anti-poverty issues for many, many years, and we need to change that, and we need some compassion with when we're dealing with the poor and the working poor. I served on a nonprofit board for many years where we were dedicated to working with the working poor. We made sure to build coalitions between our churches, our government institutions, and our businesses. And we found that with that combined approach, we were able to help these people out of this endless cycle of poverty that they face. And I want to make sure I take that experience, that compassion, and that thought process down to the state legislature and stop the anti-poverty bills that keep on going through. I think we can also look at community gardens, making sure that we pay attention to where food deserts are, especially in our area. I've done many work in South Phoenix on that endeavor with different groups, and want to make sure that we build coalitions with all of the groups that are doing work, the churches, the business, and the government institutions, because it's not just your influence at the state legislature that's going to do things. It's a bipartisan coalition and a coalition of many different members, because it's a complex problem that deserves complex solutions. But right now, being 46th in the nation in childhood poverty is not where we want to be, and I want to change that.
All right, thanks. Paul, your 2 minutes.
That question, sure. So I think that we need to make sure that we have a strong economy. That way we can ensure that anybody who wants a job can get one. We need to make sure that our wage growth is going up, which it is. We need to make sure that our economy is booming, which it has been, thanks to some changes that have happened at the federal level with the congressional budget cuts. I'm sorry, the tax cuts. We also need to make sure that we can allow nonprofits and churches to partner with the state as needed, but also that they can continue to thrive and they can continue to provide food for those who need it. But I really think the focus, we really need to make sure that, again, that anybody who wants a job can get one. And our unemployment is the lowest in the state of Arizona since 2008. That's a good trend. We need to make sure that that continues. According to the JLBC, the nonpartisan budget staff, the state has recorded its highest level ever of general fund revenues in this past fiscal year. We've collected $10.1 billion. The previous peak was $9.63 billion in fiscal year 7. In other words, our economy is we're doing well here in Arizona. We need to make sure, again, that we keep our economy strong, so again, anybody who wants a job can get one.
Thank you. Doug.
Well, I think we all agree that it's a complex issue, and it's not something the legislature is going to do by itself. I think we all agree that we're going to have to be out working out with different groups in the community. But there's other areas that we need to look at. Paula mentioned the economy. The economy is critical, and that is no doubt. But anybody who's lived in Arizona for a while knows that our economy goes up and economy goes down. And he's right, off the JLBC, saying, hey, our revenue's up, we're doing great. I can show you here the same statements that was coming out from the August 2006 JLBC report. Everything's great. Look at all this revenue we're getting. Anything soon happen thereafter? Yeah, our economy crashed. Then we had about 7% of our budget was in the rainy day fund. Currently, we have a little bit over 4% of our budgets in the rainy day fund. So if something goes south, which it will, that's just the reality of it, depends on how big it is. But we need to be ready to do that, because the people who get hurt most in these quick drops are the people at the bottom, the people who are struggling for a job. The other thing we need to do is not everybody who wants a job can get a job because they have other factors in their life. Usually it's young children. Unfortunately, right now in Arizona, that only about 25% of 3 to 4-year-olds are in a quality learning environment. So that parents can't go to work because they need to be home taking care of their children. Another really unfortunate stat is the federal government, President Trump actually signed a bill that said, Arizona, here's $56 million that you, DES, can use to invest in child care. All you need is for the legislature to say, yes, you can use that. We're still waiting for the legislature to say, yes, you can use that. So here are all these families struggling that they could be getting quality child care. The businesses that do child care could get reimbursed in rates that aren't 18 years old anymore and actually do that. But unfortunately, strictly because of inaction, these families are suffering. And again, it's those people at the bottom that are paying the biggest penalty for that.
Thank you. Hazel.
Well, I've spent my life working in a number of different roles, which has allowed me to interact with people living at all different kind of economic status. And my final position before I retired 3 years ago was with First Things First, which is the early childhood program that I was part of the team that implemented the initiative that was passed to put tobacco revenues into early childhood. What I saw firsthand as I worked in the communities, because this is a community-based program, and we had to bring all kinds of stakeholders there, but I saw story after story of the poverty that's in the state. Overall, we have about 25% of our state residents that live in poverty. And in this region, we have 21%. And these are poverty stories of people that are working every day, and they're working hard, and they still can't put a roof over their head and food on the table, and they can't afford to have child care for their kids. I've listened to people, men and women, that were sobbing because they were having to resort to either homelessness or leaving their children home with young siblings during the day because there was no other daycare option. And if they didn't work, they didn't have any support at all. There's a fallacy out there that people are getting rich off of welfare. Folks, that is just that. It's a myth, and it is no longer. There's food stamps. There's a very, very small, temporary, very short-term welfare payment, and there's maybe help with housing, but it's just not enough.
Thank you.
We have people that are suffering.
Thank you. Chris, your 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to put an exclamation point on one point that Hazel just made, is that all jobs are not created equal. I work with the working poor. These are people who are working, and they're still poor. That's why I want to fight to make sure Arizonans earn a livable wage, they get health care, they get benefits and paid sick leave. And I've worked to get good working jobs inside of Arizona. I've worked in business development. I've heard from workers across the district. The job is a sense of pride in the work you do. It's a sense of accomplishment, and they need good working jobs so they don't keep in the cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's do a follow-up question. How do you address the needs of the working poor from a legislative perspective? So, Paul, we're going to start with you.
So I may sound like a broken record here, but it's the private sector that creates jobs. It's not the government. And we need to make sure that the private sector is strong, is healthy, is robust, so we can have wage growth go up and we can have unemployment go down. There was an Invest in Ed measure that ultimately the state Supreme Court pulled off the ballot. That would have been very detrimental to all state funding, and here's why. By any stretch of the measure, over 90% of all businesses in the state of Arizona are small businesses, most of which file their taxes through their small business. In other words, that would have hurt job creators. So we need to make sure that measures like that moving forward don't occur, because we need to make sure that our small business owners, our job creators, are healthy, that they can provide jobs for those who need it, high wage paying jobs, not just minimum wage jobs.
So, agree. Paul, let me try that again. So, Paul, I agree with Paul that the economy is important. We just have very different approaches to it. You'll see a lot of people in the legislature think the way you grow an economy is to give tax breaks to corporations, especially when a lot of these corporations are out of state. So if you have that dollar, you say, here, Mr. Corporation, I'm going to give you a credit or a tax break, and it's out of state, they're going to then give it to their shareholders. That dollar is likely never coming back to Arizona. But if I took that same dollar, invested in an education, paid a teacher, bought supplies locally, invested in our buildings, guess where they're going to spend that money? In Arizona. And it's going to help our economy grow, and we're going to help more than just that top percentage up there that's going along. Same thing as with the kids' care and the child care credits, like I mentioned. One of the problems is a lot of the businesses that do that child care no longer will take these low reimbursement rates that come from DES because they're long out of date. So they're pulling out of that business from there. Then the other thing I'll mention on the economy is anytime that something comes up that the Chamber of Commerce doesn't like, we're going to hear the sky is falling, it's going to destroy our economy, everybody's going to move out. If you remember a couple years ago, Proposition 206, if I got the number right, was the minimum wage. That's all we heard. If you do the minimum wage increase, the sky will fall, every company will move out, and we'll all be living in tents thereafter. Well, that didn't happen. And guess now who's taking credit for all the wages are rising? Oh, look, our economy's going great. It's because we gave corporations. How about the fact that we gave people a livable wage instead of doing that? So that's one of the big factors in there you'll see when you actually look at the numbers. Also, if you look at our unemployment rate, you're going to hear a lot of credit people saying, hey, look, our unemployment is going down in Arizona because we gave corporations tax breaks, or we did this on taxes. The reality is Arizona was typically lower than the federal rate on unemployment. Since 2007, we had the big things. We hit high, and guess what? We've lagged behind the federal government. Our unemployment rate is almost a point higher.
Thank you. Hazel.
I've lived in Arizona for a long time, and I've watched Arizona ups and downs and ins and outs. And it seems like all I hear in our state right now is it good for corporations? Is this good for corporations? We are giving a lot of tax breaks to corporations, tax credits, all kinds of incentives to come into Arizona. But many of those companies are out-of-state companies coming into Arizona, and they are paying their staff minimum wage with no benefits. And we, as taxpayers, are picking up food stamps, we're picking up housing assistance, we're picking up daycare assistance, we're, whatever, the list goes on. And this is just not right. Those dollar tax credits we're giving to those corporations are not being invested in our community. We do get some jobs, right, but what kind of jobs? We need to start to move to the place where we partner with our corporations, but there's a double bottom line, the human aspect as well as the profit. We should not be totally evaluating the health of our economy by the dollars that Wall Street gets. We should be evaluating it by the quality of life that we live in this state, and I would hope that we can move that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris.
And like I said earlier, I worked on a board that worked with the working poor. So, I mean, I know what it likes to be living like paycheck to paycheck, not having enough money to put away to save for college, or feeling taken advantage of by a big corporation. I want to make sure we have a livable wage. I want to make sure we have health care and benefits and paid sick leave for all our jobs inside of Arizona. And I think that's important for what we're doing. But I also want to make sure that our workers aren't taken advantage of when we grow this economy and grow these jobs. That's why I've advocated advocated for career readiness programs inside of public-private partnerships inside of our universities and community colleges. We've seen joint technical and career readiness programs taken away from our schools, and I want to put them back into our schools because that'll help teach the working poor, these people who need jobs, they'll teach them a skill, and we'll teach things like our trades, our construction, our repair, maintenance, manufacturing, engineering, important things that'll kind of help Arizona grow a robust backbone for business. And I want to make sure that our entrepreneurs and our workers get back to what they're best at is following their dream rather than trying to live paycheck to paycheck. But I also support a strong labor movement reinforced by unions that can negotiate these fair wages, benefits, and conditions such that both our corporations and our workers can grow and build an Arizona that we can all be very proud of. Finally, I want to make sure that we have the ability to grow our venture capital and investment services, research and development inside of our community colleges and universities, because we have good corporate neighbors in companies like PetSmart or Honeywell that can help entrepreneurs become the next, start the next Google in a garage in Moon Valley. That's where I'd start.
Thank you. And Paul, your 30 seconds.
Thank you. So there's a straw man on the table about tax breaks to corporations. I think if we're going to talk about tax breaks for particular corporations, we should name which ones those are, because I don't know that particular corporations have received them. We have done broad-based corporate tax reform, where all corporations have received a phase down, and that was the jobs, well, that was when I was on staff. But as far as particular corporations, I don't know that that's occurred, and I don't support that. I don't support government picking winners and losers. Now, if you want to talk about overall every single business in the state of Arizona, that's fine. But no, the government should not. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a plethora of cards asking about Prop 127 and Prop 305. So Doug, we're going to start with you. What is your position on Prop 127 and Prop 305?
So we'll start with Prop 305. That's the ESA, or voucher expansion. I would vote no. I was actually part of Save Our Schools, and I would definitely spent last summer knocking on doors that led directly to this campaign now, that making sure that we don't do that, because it's going to be pulling money out of public schools and putting it in private schools. And then it's really going to be detrimental to the people who that ESA program was originally designed for, because they're going to end up at the back of the line for kids with special needs, which is what you'll hear about a lot. If you send that open to too many, then that's just not going to work. Prop 127 related to the solar energy, making sure we have clean energy out there. So I looked at that from an accountant standpoint. I could put my environmental hat on. I'm going to go solar energy, good. There's no doubt. So I put the accountant hat on, and I said, no, let me look at it from a business standpoint. And the first question I asked is, when they proposed this in other states, the energy companies there said, oh, well, maybe we can't do 50% by this year. Could we do 40% by the other year or something like that? And they went, yeah, well, let's work together on it. We're all in together, from even the power companies. APS went, no, not doing it. And so then the measure was filed, and APS immediately ran down to the legislature and said, they did what's called a striker bill, take another bill, cross everything out, and said, hey, look, if that passes, can you limit our fine? They limited their fine to $5,000. Not $5,000 per problem. $5,000 forever is what APS would have to pay if they failed that. But now they're still spending tens of millions of dollars to defeat this bill. Ask yourself why. Did they suddenly become very altruistic and are worried about consumers paying too much? I'm thinking not. I'm thinking they're a business, and doing what a business should do. They're worried about their bottom line and their shareholders. And they know that investment to defeat this bill is good business. But we as consumers should understand that it would be good for us to have that pass 127 so we can have that solar energy.
Thank you. I would like to remind the audience, while there are humorous responses, we are doing post-captioning services, so please try to refrain from added noise. Thank you. Hazel, your positions on 305 and 127.
Well, absolute no on 305. We need to put our money in our state to support public schools and make sure that every child gets absolutely the best school that they can get. We do not have the money to fund multiple school systems, and our taxpayer money needs to be handled in an accountable way, and it needs to go to public schools. 127 is an exciting one for me. I have spent a good part of my life studying the impacts of climate change and air quality and water quality and all of those environmental issues. I was at the legislature in the 90s trying to push for something similar to this, and again in the 2000s. And I was extremely concerned about the health impacts of the continued use of fossil fuels. We have to have a livable future for our grandchildren, we have to move forward with 127 and move towards clean energy. And it's only makes perfect economic sense as well. Solar energy is now the cheapest form of energy. It's half the cost of gas and way cheaper than coal. And if they're trying to tell you that, well, what about nighttime? We can use battery backup. Battery storage is very cheap. Right now it's about 3.5 to 4 cents with solar with battery backup. And natural gas is running about 7 or 8 cents per kilowatt hour.
Thank you. And Chris, your position, 127, 305.
Okay, I'll start with 305, if that's okay. So, I'm a hard no on Proposition 305. Expansion of vouchers is just going too far. They're unaccountable, and really they serve as nothing more than tax cuts for the rich, allowing them to funnel money to private education, tax-free, to pay for, again, their private education. I think you'll hear my opponents rail on about how this is all about school choice, but we already have school choice. You can choose where you go to school. I'm just not in favor of my tax dollars going to the private education of students without any accountability or transparency for that money. And that's really a stark contrast that you're going to find between me and my opponents. I am in favor of the original intent of vouchers for special needs students. Those are students that my mother would have taught. But it's expanded now, so much so that now these students that are our most vulnerable students now are at the back of the line, and I think that's just unacceptable. On Prop 127, one point that Hazel made was that the cost of renewables has fallen dramatically. Let me put some numbers maybe to it. The cost of solar power has fallen 86% over the last 8 years, and the cost of wind power has fallen 67%. I mean, frankly, renewable energy is cheap, and renewable energy is the future. You just ask our neighboring states, California and Nevada, who have already invested much infrastructure in that world. But this is not, this renewable energy plan is not just about clean energy. I mean, it's also about healthcare. It'll lower the rates of heart attacks, heart disease, lung disease, and certain cancers. And like I said, it's also an economic plan. It catches us up to California and Nevada, who have been building these energy economies for years and changing the entire energy marketplace. Really, solar energy jobs have grown 9 times faster than the overall economy nationwide. But Arizona has actually lost solar jobs. We're actually behind New Jersey in the amount of solar energy that we import, which is a problem.
Thank you. Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you. I oppose Prop 127, and here's why. Every single person's utilities bill will go up if you vote yes on 127. There have been independent studies that have suggested that if you're APS, an extra $200 a month, anybody else $100 a month. It's less money for schools, and teachers will be paying more out of their utility bills. And seniors, everybody will be paying more. It doesn't include the Palo Verde nuclear facility because it doesn't include nuclear, which, by the way, is one of the cleanest forms of energy. At the very least, it should at least include nuclear. As far as Prop 305 is concerned, I'm torn on this one only because of the voter-protected nature. We need to have some context here. There's 1.1 million students in the state of Arizona, student age. This program is capped at 30,000. So we can talk about the impact on education generally as far as funding is concerned, but it's negligible if you look at the actual numbers. We spend, according to the JLBC, $4.6 billion at the state level for K-12 education. That's about $4,200 per pupil, just state funding. So you multiply that by 30,000 students, which, by the way, giving parents direct involvement in their kids' education, that's priceless. All the studies demonstrate that if you can get parents involved in their kids' education and a quality teacher in the classroom, that kid more than likely is going to do well in their entire K-12 tenure. And so I think that we need to support this generally. There is oversight. For example, I have a friend who's in the program, and she can't get a piano teacher who teaches piano because she doesn't have a degree in piano. In other words, there are checks and balances. They have to submit receipts every single month. That's a bill that I passed the legislature. So I do support the concept generally. I'm not sure how I'm going to vote because of the voter protected nature. So I don't know about 305, but I am a hard no on 127.
Thank you. And Doug, your 30 seconds.
So just so you know, understand 127, I explained my reasoning for it. I pretty much expected Paul to say exactly what he did. He did vote for that thing to make sure that APS didn't get more than the $5,000 fine for it. And I'm not sure if you look at his campaign finance that he's gotten donations from Pinnacle West. I don't know if that influences his decision or not, but those types of things are things that we need to look at. I highly encourage people to go to the Secretary of State's website and look through different candidates filing finance reports.
Thank you. So at this point in time, we will transition to the second part of the debate where each candidate will receive a separate question with 1 minute to respond. Additionally, on some questions, the other candidates will have an optional 30 seconds to address the question. I'll announce that. And please wait for the moderator to acknowledge you. Audience members, remember you can still submit directed questions via the note cards. Just make sure that they are legible and that the names are on the top of them for the candidate you're requesting information from. So, Chris, we are going to start with you. And your first question is, what do you consider small business and what will you do to support them?
Okay, so we've been talking about small business a lot today, and that's great because we have a lot of small businesses inside of LD20. I consider small businesses on two fronts. One, we have our mom and pops who are, our pipe fitters or our constructors or our contractors or our maintenance men. They need help to make sure that they're not getting taken advantage of in the tax structure. They're not not making ends meet because they're paying too many taxes, because it's unfortunate that our larger corporations aren't paying enough in taxes to pay for the revenue that we need to generate. And then on the second aspect of small businesses, I think we need to sponsor public-private partnerships within the universities such that we can have research and development grants and tax credits to help our entrepreneurs survive and thrive in the tech sector, especially in fintech and edtech, which have really large presences in Arizona. And I want to make sure that Glendale Community College and ASU West, all the students that are going there can have their big ideas and get them to make them the next Apple.
Thank you. Hazel, your question. And this one will have an optional 30 seconds for those that you would like to have those 30 seconds. How will you reform our criminal justice system is your question, Hazel.
Well, first place, it's just not right that we have 20% of our adult males that are in our prison system. We have to start first by not guaranteeing that prison beds will be full. That's number one. Number two is we've got to start to look at the core issues that are causing the criminal behavior. Many of the people that are in the prisons are chronically mentally ill, are substance abusers, and behavioral health, and we do not have the community resources to help with that. Another big part of that population that's in our prisons are people that can't make ends meet and they see no future in their dead-end jobs. Again, that needs to be addressed. We need to help people get the training they need.
Thank you. 30 seconds, Chris?
Yes. So, Arizona has one of the highest incarceration rates in the nation, and as the only law school graduate on the panel, I think it's important that we talk about the reforms that we need to make in Arizona. I mean, incarcerating, as Hazel said, incarcerating and detaining human beings, I mean, shouldn't be motivated by profit, yet it remains a booming multi-million-dollar industry that is lining the pockets of our politicians with these private prisons. That needs to stop. We need to start amending our sentencing laws and changing, making sure we start looking at ways that we can rehabilitate these prisoners.
Thank you. Doug or Paul, would you like to comment on that one?
I'd actually like to talk about the private prison industry. I don't support private prisons. Here's the problem that we face as state legislators, though. Most of these contracts are 20-year contracts. And so most of those were signed well before many of us were even in the legislature. But I'd like to see moving forward, making sure that we don't sign any new private prison contracts. I'd also like to see more programming in the state prison system for inmates who need it, whether that's job training, whether that's education, and maybe at the nonviolent low-level offender level, we can do diversionary programs instead of automatically sending them to prison.
Thank you. So Doug, your question, and this will also have the option at the end. How will you work to protect health care coverage in Arizona, such as kids care?
So kids care is a very important one to me. The first thing we need to do is actually remove the freeze from kids care. Right now, in case you don't know, it's funded at the federal level. In order to get it through a few years ago in the legislature, the only thing they could do is it said if the feds paid 1 penny below, the program froze. So then there's been a bill each year that says, let's take off that automatic freeze. In case it happens, let the legislature come in and make sure they can take care of it. Because nationally, they've already said that they plan to take it down to 90%. So again, that was in the system this year. It didn't make it through. This is the one I mentioned before where Kelly Butler put in the amendment that said all we want to do is take the freeze off. It wouldn't cost us a dime at that point. All the Republicans voted against it. So take away that partisanship. But then actually we want to expand kids care. Make sure that we're really getting more kids in there. Readjusting the limits that how the financial, whether or not you qualify. My goal is that everybody is covered by health care to the point that when you go to the doctor, the first question is, how do I help you? Not how are you going to pay for this?
Thank you. Optional 30 seconds. Please, again, I ask you to refrain from clapping, applause, outburst, etc.
I'd actually like to talk about the, oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'd like Hazel, and then you'll go. Okay.
I just wanted to say that in 2008, 2009, they froze kids care. And by the time it was reinstated in 2016, there was about 30,000 kids on the waiting list. And I can't tell you how many times I had to sit with a mother in tears that had either had a sick child and they couldn't take him to the doctor, or they had taken their child to the emergency room and had a huge bill that they could never pay.
Thank you. Paul, your 30 seconds, and then we'll go Chris.
Thank you. Thank you. I did want to address the partisanship issue because the exact same bill, removing the freeze, was ran by Kate Rofemighi, Republican. At the time, she was in the House. And our friends across the aisle refused to support it because they knew that Kate was going to be running against Dr. Eric Meyer, a Democrat in that district. And so, sadly, partisanship is alive and well. I support getting rid of the freeze, and I don't care. It shouldn't matter if an R or D is next to your name if you're carrying it.
Right. Thank you. And Chris. 30 seconds.
I'm glad to hear Paul say that. We'll likely bring some healthcare bills to your desk. I spent many years fighting for affordable healthcare, and I think the affordability and healthcare are some of the most important issues in our voters' life. I really think beyond kids care, which we definitely need, I think people should really be able to buy into a well-administrated, low-cost state Medicaid program like Access, and make sure that they get the health insurance they need, because that is what is on people's minds these days.
Thank you. Paul, for you, this is only for you because several people have asked if you have a teaching certificate, and if you do not have a teaching certificate, what are your plans on getting a teaching certificate?
I don't have a teaching certificate. State law allows for teachers who teach at a charter school not to have to be have a certification. I do have a master's from ASU West, and I'm working on a second master's from the University of Dallas. As far as I'm concerned, my students, if you ever want to come to my classroom, it's open. They've grown so much in their writing. We just finished Homer. We finished the Iliad. We're on to the Odyssey. We're on to Aristotle's Poetics next. And it's a new class. I'm at a new school this year. I was at Veritas Preparatory for 4 years. Now I'm at North Phoenix Prep just because it's closer to home. And I got to tell you, I've seen so much growth just in the last few weeks with my students writing, with their discussion. In fact, my would-have-been opponent, Larry Herrera, came by my classroom for 2 hours 2 years ago. He's like, wow, I didn't know this was this good. You do some good work here. So I'm not suggesting that every teacher doesn't need certification, but in my case, it seems to be working out pretty well.
Thank you. Chris, this is your question, and we will have the optional 30 seconds afterwards. Do you believe we need a tax increase this session? Why or why not? And what would you tax?
Well, I don't think we need a tax increase this session. I think we just need a full and transparent review of the corporate tax breaks that we've been given away for many years. I think if we start focusing on that and also not allowing an expansion of the vouchers, we can get the public schools the money that we need. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here is the voucher program, because those public tax dollars are being spent on private education, and I'm just firmly against that. I mean, I think charters have a place in our educational fabric, but they need to have the same standards, accreditation, and oversight as our public schools. So that's where I would stand on the tax increase, because I think that's what it's getting at, is we would increase taxes for public education, but that wouldn't be needed if we pay attention to where we're spending money.
Okay, I saw Doug first. Doug, your 30 seconds.
So Chris is right. What we really need to do right now is their funding problem. You'll hear that 42% of the schools get that money. The problem is the pie is too small. But that is all these credits that we've given away year after year. Sales tax exemptions. Paul mentioned that we do cross-the-board credits. You're right, because those cross-the-boards are a lot of those out-of-state corporations we're doing. We've also given away, we voted in $30 million to keep a coal mine alive, but that's not going to work out. We've been giving away for people who have capital gains on their sales tax. We take 25% off of the top for that. So all these giveaways is what we need to be rolling back, not increasing taxes.
Thank you. Optional 30 seconds. Paul.
Yeah, just a correction of the record. It's not 42%. After the budget that we passed, the $700 million in new spending that I talked about for K-12 education, we're actually spending 55% of all state spending is now going to K-12 education. And the pie, as I mentioned earlier, is getting bigger. I mean, we've collected more revenue this past fiscal year than we've ever collected. Our high water mark, just as a reminder, was $9.6 billion in fiscal year 7. This past year was $10.1 billion. So we're making great progress. And by the way, our economy is diversified.
Thank you.
Yeah.
30 seconds, pretty fast. Hazel, would you like to comment on that one?
I don't think so. I don't have
All right.
anything to add.
So, Hazel, this question is just for you. What is your experience with the legislature?
Well, I've actually been working with the legislature since 1979. I actually worked with the legislature in California before that to some extent as well. I have been in a number of different roles that have required me to work closely with the legislature, including being in charge of healthcare licensing and Medicare certification in the 80s, during the time when the Access program was being expanded from acute care to add long-term care, behavioral health, and mental health. I also have worked heavily on issues around air quality and worked with the Senate committee on air quality when the EPA came down on us in 2006 or 7 and said, you're going to lose your transportation funds if you don't solve this issue. So I worked very closely with that.
Thank you. So Doug, we'll start with you on this one, but they'll have the optional 30 seconds. Will you vote to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, and what is your position, or explain?
Yes. So people often ask me, when was the moment you decided to run for office? And I will tell you, it was a year and a half ago. I was up actually in the House gallery because I'd been there to talk about environmental issues and budget. And I was sitting there. It's pretty quiet up there usually, not like the last couple weeks of this session. And then someone spoke up and said, hey, we're going to vote on the Equal Rights Amendment. And I was thrilled because this is something my mother fought for in the 70s. I was very disheartened because immediately there was a substitute motion that said, we're going to go to recess because we don't want to talk about the Equal Rights Amendment. So there was a big fight about it. So then they did have that vote on that substitute amendment. Do you think they voted on ERA? Nope. They went to recess instead. Guess what happened this year? Exactly the same thing. It's bad enough that we can't ratify it, but it is horrible when we can't even talk about it. And this bill gets introduced every year, and every year a chairman of some committee throws it in the drawer. That's unacceptable.
Thank you. Would anyone like an optional 30 seconds for that?
Well, I just want...
Hold on.
Hazel can go first.
I see Chris first, and then Hazel will call on you.
Okay. Well, I too, I'm like Doug. I was just shocked to the conscience to see that we could not pass the Equal Rights Amendment in the legislature. I mean, it's fundamentally unfair that one person gets treated differently solely because of their gender or their race, yet it's still happening in Arizona. And I want to change that, and I'm in favor of making Arizona the 38th state to pass the ERA. I deeply believe our state is strongest when all our voices are heard, and I will listen to community members, regardless of their race or creed, and apply that when I'm elected.
Right, thank you. Now Hazel.
Okay. I worked on the Equal Rights Amendment in 1972. I think it was 72. When it was initially passed, and I worked in California to get it ratified for California. After moving to Arizona, I was horrified that we still hadn't even heard it, and here we are, so many years later, and we still haven't allowed it to even have a fair hearing.
Thank you. Paul, would you like to weigh in on this one?
That's okay.
All right. So, Paul, your next question is, how do you think the Department of Justice should work together with the police departments to ensure civil rights are not being violated?
Well, the question presupposes that the feds, the Department of Justice, should be actively engaged with local police departments. Not having thought that through before, I'm not so sure that they should. I was just today, I was given the Legislator of the Year award from the Arizona Police Association for my work on the Officer Craig Tiger Act. And I really think that we have excellent police officers here in the state of Arizona. We have excellent policies. We have a great chief in Chief Williams. And I really think that we should defer to the local, assuming that nothing egregious happens, and to my knowledge, nothing has. In fact, at the Trump rally, the nation, different cities, different police departments across the nation looked to Arizona for how Phoenix police handled the Trump rally after the rally. And so I think Arizona is a model for as far as what we're doing well here in the state of Arizona.
Thank you. Chris, your next question.
Okay.
I've got a lot of questions over here. So let's start with this one, and this will have a 30-second weigh-in. How do you propose, or what do you think the legislation can do to ensure school safety and still protect Second Amendment rights?
Right. After Parkland, after Columbine, after all these school shootings, I as a newly married person, I think it's terrible that we have to think about the thought of violence inside of our schools. And I want to put together an action plan to make sure that we don't have that kind of thing happen in Arizona, because it's absolute tragedy. And I have certain solutions to make sure that we have safety in our schools. So those would include adding more guidance counselors to spot problems early. Those would include putting together action plans for in the event that a school shooting occurs, so that they can have the security on on board in the first place. How that relates to the Second Amendment, I'm not quite sure, but we just need to make sure guns are not inside of our schools, so arming teachers is just not a very good idea, and we need to make sure we plan for the bad apple that could occur.
Thank you. 30 seconds. Doug, I see you.
So I can't answer all that in 30 seconds, but I'll tell you that I was trained to shoot by the NRA, and I believe that when they train you and they say that it's a gun owner's responsibility to make sure that their firearms do not fall into the hands of people who are unauthorized or untrained. That's the policy I want to follow on that. As far as schools specifically, more counselors in schools, because it's not only going to help with this violence issue, but in case you folks don't remember, that going through high school and grammar school is kind of emotionally traumatic. So if we have counselors there, they can help out not with guns, just with gun safety, but with the other issues these children are going through.
Thank you. Paul?
We did get $10 million for school counselors in this past budget. That's one thing. I also think we need more school resource officers. These are either retired or current Arizona Post certified peace officers, and also the anonymous hotline where any kid can call if they see any dangerous or violent activity. I think those three things will improve school safety.
Thank you.
I just would like to add that research has shown very clearly that when we start young with our children and we give them strong social emotional skills, that we prevent a lot of violence. We also need to really look at the number of counselors in our schools, but also trauma specialists. Many of these kids come from really troubled homes, and they need support. And we can intervene early and help them develop the social emotional skills they need.
Thank you. So this, again, will have the 30-second option, and Hazel, we'll start with you. If you are the representative for LD20, will you hold town halls, and also how will you keep your district up to date and connect with them?
Absolutely. I find that when we talk about the issues and we come together, we find solutions that we never dreamed we would have. So those town halls and group meetings would be incredibly important for me. Also, my door will always be open to people. I think that's always been the way when I've been in management, and it will continue to be the way for elected officials. I also feel that it's really important to communicate with the community through things like newsletters and that type of thing to help them understand what is going on, because part of the problem we have is most people have no idea what's going on at our legislature, and we just have to communicate with them better.
Thank you. 30 seconds. I see you, Chris.
Sure.
And then Doug.
Okay. Well, my background, I was a community newspaper editor for many years. So I spent many years just making sure my community was informed, and I plan to continue that when elected. You can actually see a newspaper I put together outside about my platform, because I plan to keep everyone informed inside of LD20, and that's my promise when elected. In fact, I've already kind of been doing it. Every month I have a community coffee where I invite the community members inside of a neighborhood to come and talk to me, and I can listen and interact with them, which I think is important for me as a government man.
Doug.
So I mentioned before the candidates in the park. I'll continue to do things like that in coffee. I'm very much into outreach. And as I've knocked on a lot of doors, met with a lot of teachers, just talked with a lot of people in LD20, I hear time and time again, hey, you know, I tried to go meet with our current representatives, and they weren't available. They didn't answer my calls. I couldn't get in. Some of them said, hey, I could go see Kimberly Yee, but whenever they went over to the House side, they were stonewalled time and time again. It was a repeated story I've heard. We mentioned the article before about the two young girls in 2016. You're right, Paul did reach out to them later, but there is a track record there that's just unacceptable to representing people.
Thank you. And Paul, your 30 seconds.
Every legislative district in the state of Arizona represents roughly over 200,000 constituents. And so it is difficult, especially we are a part-time legislature. I also teach. I'm in the classroom every single day. I do see Rivco here, though. We don't always agree on policy, but I always love it when she comes to visit me. And she tells me why I'm wrong on whatever it is that... then we have a healthy discussion. And so I always try and make time for those one-on-one meetings. I also like to meet with folks at Starbucks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Doug, this question is just for you. What is your position on all mail-in paper ballots?
So I think Arizona was actually one of the leaders that if we had mail-in ballots, I think that's a great idea. So you can actually sit at home, think it through, fill out the ballot. But I don't think you should be forced to do that. So I don't think it should be 100%. You should still have the option if you want to go down there and fill out your ballot and at the table or whatever, get your sticker. That's awesome. That's a great way to do it. Because I'd also like to open it up and make sure we take a lot of the barriers away from voting in general. We should have automatic registration. We should even have same-day registration and changes. So if you happen to move and you didn't tell the department right away, or as what we've had now is people have moved, told MVD, but unfortunately the Secretary of State did not bother to update over 300,000 of those. People are being disenfranchised because they're going to a polling place and being told you can't vote here, you gotta go somewhere else. Well, we should have the technology now and today that we can check it and make sure they can put in a ballot right then and there and don't have to go for this provisional maybe process that's gonna be there. This is the modern age.
Thank you. And this final question, before we go into closing statements, Paul, we'll start with you, but we also will have an additional 30 seconds. So the audience member has asked, it seems more Democrats are participating in clean elections. What went into your decision to run traditional rather than clean elections? And then the rest of you can comment on your 30 seconds, but please wait for me to call on you. So Paul, go.
Sure, I'd have to think about it. That was about 6 years ago when I first decided to run. I was a House staffer for 3 years. And of all people, Kimberly Yee says, hey, have you ever thought about running for office? And I thought about it, but I never took any tangible steps towards doing it. That year, Jim Wires and Linda Gray, they both decided to retire, so there were 2 open seats. And I thought, well, if there's ever time to run, it's now. As far as the traditional, I'll be honest with you, it was just 6 years ago. I don't actually quite remember. I'd have to think about it. But I guess I've always just thought about the old-fashioned way of asking folks for, and it's hard. I mean, that's the worst part about the job is asking for dollars to help fund your campaign. But I just thought, I just prefer the one-on-one, the traditional, talk about your policy, talk about who you're about, what you support, and then just go from there.
Okay. Doug, I see you first.
That's okay. Yeah, so I did decide to go run clean because I think clean elections was a big thing. I helped back in the 90s when the program was put in. It's absolutely under attack. You're going to see a proposition about it today to try and destroy it a little bit more that the legislature referred over. When you talk about being able to talk to people one-on-one, when I was running for office, they said, if you go traditional, plan on 40% of your time is dialing and begging for money. I said, I'd rather spend 40% of my time out knocking on people's doors who are the people I'm trying to truly represent.
Thank you. Chris?
So I am in a unique position as well, as I ran as a traditional candidate back in 2016, and I lost by just 3 points, and I'm running as a clean elections candidate this time, so I think I have an interesting perspective on this. And I found the clean elections process to be really in line with my, my platform of accountability, transparency inside of government, but also just to be a much better experience. I get to spend more time, like Doug said, with the voters and talking to them about their issues and learning what kind of things our neighbors want to talk about and be the advocate that I want to be for the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Well, I would have never considered running if there wasn't clean elections. I hate to ask for money. It just isn't me. And I don't want to be in the pocket of anyone that's going to say I have to vote their way because they donated to me. I really love the freedom that I don't have to be raising money, and I can be out talking to the voters, and I can be out interacting, and I just would not run any other way.
Thank you. At this point in time, we'll go to our closing statements. So, Chris, we'll start with you. 1 minute closing remarks.
Okay, great. Again, my name is Chris Gilfillan, and thank you so much for being here. I would be remiss not to notice that my opponents on the Republican side have not taken the time to go and talk to you. I hope you remember that when you go to the voting booth. But the 3 big things for me, again, are education, small business, and government accountability. They're all pet issues for me, as my mom's a special education teacher's assistant in a middle school, and I just want to advocate for her and teachers like her at the legislature. I'm a small business guy because I've been in business development for many years and want to make sure that our entrepreneurs can survive and thrive past their ribbon cutting and put in policies to help them do that. And then finally, I was a newspaper editor before I was a lawyer, so I just care deeply about, government transparency, accountability in government, which is half the reason I'm running. I want to make sure that we have accountable politicians inside of our government, and as you can see, we don't have them listening to you. Again, my name is Chris Gilfield, and let's work together to support education, support workers, and my website is www.christopheraz.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Hazel.
We right now have things going on in our nation and in our state like we've never seen before. We have choices that we have to make about our future and what it looks like. We need to reevaluate our values and what we care about and what do we want our future to look like for those children that are in this room, our children. We need to elect officials that will have foresight, that won't say, well, this is the way it's always been done, and try to keep doing more of that, but ones that will look to the future and find new ways of doing things. And I hope that I have shown you that I am that future-looking person that's willing to roll up my sleeves and get things done and create an Arizona that works for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug.
Well, thank you all for coming out this evening. We've discussed some important issues, and I think you've seen a contrast between me and my opponent, but not just on particular policy items, but our approach to the office. I mean, I believe we need to bring back sensible government to Arizona. We need legislators who are out listening to the people in LD20. We make sure that everybody is treated with respect, and we're standing up and doing what's right for our community. And that's what I plan to do as your state senator. Now, you may not agree with every vote that I make or every policy stance that I do, but you can rest assured that I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to take the time to meet with you, and I'm going to let you communicate with you effectively and honestly and let you know why I did vote that way. So if you have questions, please feel free to visit my website. It's ervinforaz.com. That's ERVINFORAZ.com. I look forward to hearing from you. I look forward to earning your vote, and I really look forward to representing you in the Senate. Thank you.
Thank you. And Paul.
Thank you. Again, my name is Paul Boyer. I'm running for state senate, and I just want to thank Douglas for being so kind in his approach towards this election cycle, even more so than my primary opponent. And so thank you, really honestly, thank you for that. I've been called an effective West Valley legislator. Just a few things I've been able to accomplish while I've been in office is providing high school testing options. This is the first year in March where students can take something other than the AZ Merit. They can take the SAT or the ACT, which can also be used to help them get into college. And so it's a double bonus for students because it incentivizes them to do well on this test that can be in lieu of the state standardized test. I got additional funding for the Arizona schools for the deaf and blind for the teacher pay increase, and also for teachers that do weekly home visits for the 0 to 3 population, so they can learn how to communicate, and then also teach the parents how to communicate with their children. We passed the budget that I mentioned, $700 million in new funding, and please visit my website, BoyerAZ.com. Thank you.
Thank you. To our candidates, we thank you so much for participating in our forum this evening. And to our audience members, we thank all of you who took time to come and inform yourselves before voting. And thank you for your politeness. We encourage you to visit www.azcleanelections.gov/voter dashboard for a customized experience to find information on the general election, the candidates, the issues, and to view this debate on demand. Please fill out the debate evaluation form and return it to our volunteers. Your feedback is very important to the commission, and it will help us improve future debates. Thank you all for coming tonight. You're welcome to stay and speak directly with our candidates. Thanks again, and good night.